Okay. Oh, man, that has a delay where it catches you before the screen even starts. Duly noted. Duly noted. All right. So it's about that time for the articles of ADOS coming to you live in effect direct on Facebook, Facebook group, Facebook page. We had to. Periscope, YouTube, and Twitch. Yes, we're everywhere right now recording this live discussion on episode 5 called Black Neighborhoods Are in Disorder. This episode, oh, let me introduce myself. My name is Lisa Todd, one of the co-hosts of Articles ADOS, along with my co-host
Daoud Giazan.
Daoud Giazan is with us, guys. He is on the live. You can hear him, can't see him, not yet. Not yet. You don't know that, but not yet. Anyway, he is probably over there not agreeing with what I'm saying. But anyway, Black neighborhoods are in disorder. If you have a question anywhere you're watching right now, put it in the chat below, and we're going to try to let me put this on. If you have a question, ooh, stop talking. Right now, put it in the chat below. The best question is going to get one of our promo packs. Daoud, tell them what a promo pack is.
Promo pack consists of items that we've been able to affix our logo and name to.
That's right. We slap our name on the side of it and you get to have it with a low cost of free. So shoot us a message if you have any questions about any of episodes, but today we are specifically talking about episode 5. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for showing the love. So I came across this term, neighborhood disorder, researching another article that I was doing. And I literally stopped and tried to figure out what in the world they were talking about. I thought they were giving Black neighborhoods this scientific diagnosis, a mental health disorder diagnosis, if you would. And then I looked into the definition of what neighborhood disorder is. And it is basically our neighborhoods that are in poverty, our neighborhoods that have signs of graffiti, of wear and tear, signs of crime, signs of neglect, and you know that fits our neighborhoods to a T. So in 2001 they had a they studied us. They studied our neighborhoods and they decided that to give I think it was a couple years they studied this and just drove around our neighborhoods, interviewed people in our neighborhoods. So we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about the main event. That was our main event. Before we got to the main event, our personality piece, we talked about boomers. Daoud, who is a member of that generation, I am Generation X. Oh no, not Wakanda, just Generation X. And so Daoud, I did not know that until he said it. And so we had questions for the boomers, and we wanted to know were you tired? Are you tired? And at what point can you don't have the luxury of being tired when there is so much more that needs to be done. I mean, you walk outside of your door and you can see that things need fixing. So you get tired, but you take some rest and then you get back out there. So what was your, being a boomer, what was your experience with my questioning your generation? Did you like that or not?
Oh, I loved it. And I wish we'd get more of that. We often take things for granted, but I liked it. And I'd also like to point out that I'm at the tail end.
Okay.
I'm at the tail end of the boomer generation, the last year, in fact.
Okay. So you just made it in, right?
Just made it in. Yeah, there's validity in questioning the state of the baby boomers because it was in our prominence from the mid 70s all the way up to the 2000s that we had a lot of economic growth, unparalleled for our group since freedom rang. So there was a de facto burden upon us to take that and use that to our group advantage. I remember there was a common statement as integration was taking shape in the 70s. I heard this as a little child that you're going to, do well in school, you're going to achieve much, and you're going to get into positions where you'll be able to help our people better. That was the overall message I was getting all through middle school and through high school and going on off to college. That was the expectation. And while we did get to see some Blacks in high places with their Black faces, we could only observe from reality, whether you take a look at the percentage of Black people in political positions and how that can be defined in terms of how Black societies with that Black leadership benefited. And we have periodic spikes of periodic success, but overall, it's a negative correlation. That means just because you have a Black face in a high place does not translate into benefits to the collective. And that rests on baby boomers.
Right. And I brought up also that we understand that, you're older and you're less active, but in what ways can you participate? What ways can you help? And that one was that, okay, because you may hold a lot more wealth than the average ADOS person, can you donate? Or can you donate your time in a way that's not taxing on you physically? Make phone calls for a candidate or make phone calls to your Congress people,
Sit and talk about on a podcast.
Yeah, that as well. You can do that as well. But so there are ways that you can get involved. Daoud spoke about his experience when he went to protest as a boomer with them. I'm going to say now, these kids nowadays in college, what are they, Generation Y? I don't know. Okay, so he went with Generation Y, not the millennials, Generation Y, and he protested some police violence that occurred in Ohio. So I mean, it's not unheard of that boomers can get out there and get involved. So don't sell yourself short. Sell yourself short. So. Oh, and lastly, with the boomer conversation is, if you can't help, if you're tired and you don't want to do anything, could you not interfere with those who are trying to change? And that's big. because you are trying to work against us in a sense, because you're voting for things to not change because they have black faces. Just recently, Joyce Beatty won her race because the majority of the people just voted for what they always been voting for, not thinking about change. And I don't know what the fear in change is. We want our communities to change for the better. So if you're voting for the same person with the same ideas and nothing's changing, it's insanity to keep doing that because nothing changes. I'm talking slow here because this is okay.
Well, could I take two things with that?
Please
What you
go
said?
ahead.
Yeah, two things that I didn't mention during the broadcast, which is what makes this so special, is that there are some mythologies about protest. A lot of them are peopled disproportionately by the young because young people are vital. Uh, there's mysticism of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all relatively young men, but in their late 30s, especially upon assassination, and of which sadly they've gotten the most fame. But the
Mm,
people that were commonly in the street getting hosed, I mean, you see it, or dog sick on them, they were young people. And we tend
mhm,
to underestimate that. And there's a sinister reason why that's underestimated. But a part of the mysticism that we carry is that these old heads are walking around doing all this stuff. They weren't. They were doing the funding or they were hiding.
mhm,
Today people, celebrate Martin Luther King now, but I can tell you a story where it's really funny, but I won't take too long, where black folks and the black clergy weren't supportive of Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, but they'll praise them today. And so,
right.
the dynamic we're noticing about the baby boomers now, they're just doing what their parents and grandparents did 50, 60 years ago. Most people are afraid of change because of the unknown. You go back to the enslavement experience. Most of the slave revolts were undermined by the enslaved themselves because they created a fantastic system of rewards that punished people fighting for their freedom. Now, we don't maybe like to talk about that. We can take it to the European Jewish experience under the Holocaust. A lot of European Jews cooperated with that, which they don't talk about.
Mhm,
So, this is what we don't talk about. Among white people, there was a popular notion of, don't trust anyone over 30, not just because they are automatically untrustworthy, but they are benefiting or are entrenched into the system. Debt was one of those things that kind of gets people to shut up, which is another reason tactically why student loans started costing money and people started getting in debt over that. It was a way to stop protest among educated young people who are still vital and are willing to get out on the streets with a doctorate.
right.
The reason why that was able to take shape, besides the profit motive, it was another way to undermine popular movements among the educated population. What was the educated population doing in the 50s, 60s, and 70s? Protesting against war rather effectively. People in power didn't like that. Now, they couldn't go out and wholesale kill white folks, although at Kent State they did.
Right.
At Jackson State, predominantly black university, they outwardly did, and that we don't even talk about that, or they don't talk about it enough because we
Mhm,
don't own a lot of media ownership to talk about it. But they weren't going to old folks' homes to do this killing or to suppress dissent. They went to places where people are both learning about their environments and they have still a lot of vitality. So this is not anything new, and that's why I emphasize, especially with the baby boomers whose median age has to be close to 70 by now.
right.
We can't, and we shouldn't be surprised if they're not in the streets. What we can say is because you benefited during a period of time where affluence was a little easier to accrue, that you throw some dough at it if you can't be involved in it, or if you can't do that, like you said, at least don't get into the fray. But 14 to 16-year-old black youth were the ones getting hosed and arrested. It was people like Mumia Abu Jamal, age 15, gets beat into the Panthers. he got so tired of what the cops were doing, and there was no adult willing to stay in front of police bayonets or police batons, that he joined the Black Panthers at 15.
Right.
You know, they got young people now wrapped up in video game play, and that is not on an accident either. So that's I've talked a lot, so I'll just use that one point because we can move on.
Oh, okay. No. That was a good point. So yeah, boomers, do more than you can, and do the best you can. How about that? Do the
Very
best
good.
you can. We went through the rapid news pretty quickly. Some of those included articles from Richmond Free Press, SarahCarter.com, and Ben Swan's YouTube channel. All of those you can listen to on the podcast. And then we get to our main event. The main event, like I said, was the where is it here? Oh, where did I put it? It was a 2001 U.S. Department of Justice, in conjunction with the National Institute of Justice, entitled, it was a brief entitled "Disorder in Urban Neighborhoods, Does It Lead to Crime?" So does the way your neighborhood look, does the way your neighborhood function lead to crime? They studied that. And we interviewed that brief. We asked that brief questions. We, let me see, we kind of got to the bottom of the question. Does graffiti, does broken windows, does prostitution, does drug use, does litter lead to crime, cause crime? They studied neighborhoods in Chicago, 2001, where they really just drove around video recording, and then they interviewed about 3,000 people in those neighborhoods. And they said it was recorded and it's available for review from the public, but I didn't go that far into where you can find that information. You would have to dig a little deeper to get that information. If you want to see the actual footage of what they recorded, I don't know if that's available. But studies like, they were also studying whether or not the broken windows theory was viable. And we know that the New York City was the leader, and Rudy Giuliani was the leader in cleaning up the streets using the broken windows theory, meaning if someone in a neighborhood sees that there's a broken window and nobody's fixing, then that they too will get the inspiration to pick up a rock and break more windows. And it sends a signal that nobody cares what happens in this neighborhood and I can get away with it. To some extent, that is true. If you can get away with something, and you'll try to, right? So that's where the broken neighborhoods policing comes into. And that is, they'll say, oh, let me get mine. They'll say, we got to stop that low level crime. We got to clean up those neighborhoods. And if we do that, then the crime decreases. That's New York's theory. And it helped increase mass incarceration. People were getting arrested for these lower level crimes. Of course, once you're in that system and it's this vicious cycle, you can't afford the fees. So you get rearrested because you can't afford the fees, or you do another low-level crime. It's all a cycle to mass incarcerate people. So after they did this study, and then some of the questions we asked, like what were you studying? And here it is. So they basically just observed people in public places. They watched you they watched you commit crimes. I don't know if they called the cops on people, but they observed what was happening in these public places. And then that wasn't enough information, so they decided to interview people. And so they interviewed people and then asked them questions, like if they saw crime, would they report it? They asked them questions like how they feel about their neighbors, their neighbors' children. Do they think there is enough level of guidance in those with the children in the neighborhood? They asked were they most likely to call the cops if they saw crime happening? So they're asking these people in this Chicago neighborhood these questions, and the end result was the more a neighborhood was willing to work together, then that was a neighborhood that had lower crime. Meaning, if you were more willing to watch out for your neighbors, if you were more willing to have a connection with your neighbors, then that was a safer, better neighborhood. As we know, everyone was redlined into these high crime ghetto areas, and there is less trust automatically in those neighborhoods. So you are breeding neighborhoods that are less trustful of each other, and so of course they're neighbors that don't trust each other. There's no cohesiveness, and so those are where the high crime areas are, because neighbors just don't trust each other or want to get involved in each other's lives. So they also found that we can clean up a neighborhood, but ultimately having neighbors get along and look out for each other decreases crime. So, Daoud, what did you think of the article that we interviewed, as far as how our neighborhoods are being studied, and even though they study it, they still remain the same, not much changes? Can you speak to that?
Yes, they've been studied since the founding of the country, whether free Africans, formerly enslaved or not, all the way to Native Americans. They've always studied. And the goal of studying them was to control them, always. So this is a tradition. As I pointed out in the program, though I'm going to take a different tack now, yes, we've been studied, and the goal on one level is to understand the dynamics. Some researchers are sincerely interested in helping. Those who perform longitudinal studies, orthographic studies, they are trying to seek an understanding of the dynamics so they can come up with plausible solutions to them. So in that sense, they're good, but it's a short version view. As you've interacted with me, you notice I relate things to short-term, medium-term, and long-term views, because you can come up with different results in the short term, but you can also come up with diametrically opposed views or understandings when you take the long view. So on the short view, such studies are good, especially if the people that are initiating such studies have good and sincere intentions. But they have to answer to a larger view all too often that undermines their conclusions. So every riot that is taking place since the last century has determined there are critical factors involved. The most famous of these studies from a commission called the Kerner Commission that foretold that the United States was going to become more divided racially, and that there would be two unequal societies, one black, one white, one both unequal, and that just sums it up. And that was fulfilled. But they also provided some policy prescriptions and also indicators. One of the indicators, or I'll just give two. Two of the indicators are, one is that you have a depraved community. Now, what do I mean by that? I think it goes into your, what's the word they use? It begins with a D.
What? Disorder?
There you go. Disordered communities. We got to remember, and that's what's forgotten. You also not only have to do time frames of understanding, but you also have to not forget the past. And we forget the past all too often, or we've been taught or conditioned to talk as though the past never happened. So let's talk about the communities. The communities are not just communities. We know the old term ghetto. They're ghettoized communities. So those are created communities. Where the ghettos come from Europe. What do they do with ghettos in Europe? They were formed in order to have their historically despised groups become dysfunctional. That was their purpose. So at this point, this is a small example. So at this point, when you complain about how bad the schools are, you can't complain how bad the schools are if the same old thing keeps happening. Remember, it's insanity. But there's a sane reason why it's going on. So the truth is that schools are not broken. They are made to be the way they are. So the same thing with societies. On the short-term view, we can come up with policy prescriptions, but the long view, those who have power determine whether or not they're implemented, enforced with consistency or not. So the problems that people, whether it be the Irish ghettos or the Italian ghettos of 2 centuries ago, they had the same problems, or they had the same solutions. They had the same analysis for those communities, and they didn't improve. They didn't improve for over 100 years until they started becoming white. Think about that.
Right.
So that's another reason why Yvette and her analysis wins the day ultimately, because that's the long view. And people don't like the implications. Some of those implications are rather revealing in terms of what we should be doing. And one of the things we weren't doing enough was political activism. And so that kind of situates us in the situation that we are in. So that's the challenge, is that you're in a system that has built in our minds, conditioned in our minds. Another point is that it's all equal, that we all have an equal chance. All we have to do is work hard and we'll succeed. Well, that's a lie. No one gives the figures, because the figures are too embarrassing. All these slogans we get, just work hard. There's also other more famous slogans I can't remember now, and Yvette talks about it in terms of do for selfers and all that other stuff. All that mentality came out of the high point of American social and economic progress from after the Civil War till about 1910. That's when this greatest time frame of American capitalism really existed. In the point of 34%, it reached a high point of 34% of those who did those things, worked hard, actually made it into the wealthier classes. Now just think of what they were doing to us during that time. So we can still live off those mythologies, though. Those mythologies have persisted because of that success, that past success in the late portions of the 19th century and early portions of the 20th century. Those are continued thrown in our face. We just don't label them time frame wise. We just label them in terms of the slogans. So is that true now? Well, before the first slam of fraud took shape in the form of what they call the Great Recession, but really should be called white elite robbery of the Treasury. Before that occurred, what was once 34% in the last 2 previous centuries had dwindled down to no more than 3%. So that means we have an economic engine that produces social mobility to a tune of 3%. When it was once 34%, which was the high point, it was in all reality 34%. I mean, dwindled down to 3%. I have not read the recent journals to know, since we went through that debacle in 2008, and we're in a current one now, I don't know where that social mobility scale is going to be at. 1% maybe. So what we're saying is that the economic engine of capitalism works so that no more than 3% within the last 20 years, and right now it's probably down to 1%, and that's just a guess, that those will be able to make social mobility. So what have we noticed? Social mobility has been slowing since Reaganomics in the 80s, going from the poverty class to the wealthy class, or poverty class to what's called middle class, has been slowing down people's ability to do so. It has extended, though, in the hands of the white collective, where they still disproportionately benefit from that social mobility capabilities because of networking, because of all those things, and that results in their winning, but they are still winning at a 3%, nowhere near the 34% America once had. So this is done purposely, or this is a part of the engine of capitalism. And that's what the critics of capitalism always said, that it would always dwindle down to where there was no social mobility, and then they got to start doing things to keep people in line.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Patriot Act is one of those lines. And what they're talking about in terms of mandating the vaccine, that's a part of more social controls, more surveillance, more imprisoning of people. You know, this is happening in Europe 2 centuries ago, in the 1840s as well. Same dynamics. They criticize the poor for not speaking the king's English well. They criticize them for the participation in criminal activity. They criticize the poor because they engaged in drug trafficking. I mean, does any of this sound familiar? It's the same old behavioral dynamic, one in a pre-industrialized society, and the same thing is happening during industrialization's fall. And so now we're transitioning into a new era of AI and other automated designs where labor won't really be needed at all. They're just trying to go into this new phase with little cost to labor as possible. And that's another reason why they don't need ADOS. That's another reason why more people, ADOS people, need to get into this fight.
Right. And so after they did all, thank you, Dawood, after they did all of that studying of us, they concluded that neighborhoods that are in disorder, out of all the crimes that can occur, murder, rape, violence, just gang violence, any crime that is on this spectrum of, I think it's like 8 crimes, only burglary. There was only a connection between neighborhood disorder and burglary. If you have disorder in a neighborhood, that just doesn't lead to murder. That's not reason why it's happening. But burglary has a connection. But we ultimately know that these communities are poor, so people are stealing a lot.
From each other.
Yes, from each other. So that was the only connection between neighborhood disorder and crime. I also played a clip from a professor from the university, Northeastern University, I believe that, get it back, Northeastern University, which is a more recent look into what neighborhood disorder is. And he also came to the determination through his research that neighborhood disorder does not lead to crime. It does lead to, in his research, health outcomes that are poor. And we know that. We see it through this COVID, that most likely if a neighborhood is in disorder, those people that are in those neighborhoods are have poor health outcomes. That was the only connection that he found in his research. So
could I jump in at this point after that?
Yeah, we're aware of this. We're aware that most likely that those neighborhoods have health issues. Those people in those neighborhoods have health issues. So Daoud spoke a little bit more of it in some upcoming episodes that are coming up. So maybe he'll, don't give it all away, Daoud, because those episodes, they haven't aired yet.
All right. But what I wanted to say to support this is something I did mention. I did mention on the episode about the history of these types of psychological approaches to understanding what's going on. But what I
Okay.
want, but what I wanted to share now is what I said earlier and strengthen it with. Remember when I said that the schools are not in disarray or broken; they're made that way.
Mm-hmm.
So then, if we have a study that determines the result was that the study makes no sense, there's no correlation, only one correlation in terms of robbery, which makes sense that if the neighborhood doesn't care much about each other, a person who wants to take advantage of the household and wants to rob it would love the fact that people don't communicate, people don't look for out for each other, and all that. So that makes sense. But
Right.
but 95% of what's left doesn't make sense. So we knew this in the 80s. I remember reports that were saying the same, criticizing Giuliani and others for implementing it because there wasn't much study into it. And what studies that were being done at the time determined that there was not much of a correlation. We just kept getting their verbal responses. Well, we're seeing differences in neighborhoods. And they'd interview the periodic black person on the street to be used as a prop as to why this white gentleman is saying what he's saying. And it continued.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the reason for doing something that we know now, definitely now, was broken then? And again, people that take the long view and have power, they also knew it too. They were just looking at it from a sense, what excuse can we utilize to do what happened? Now, this is what happened. The reason for the broken windows policy was not to limit crime. It was to eradicate an undesirable element in the society. What happened in the 90s, after about a decade of the broken windows policies and lasted up till a report I read of 2015, it's probably even continuing, there was a migration from some of these city areas where broken windows was taking place of blacks moving back to the South. Blacks
Yeah.
were tired of getting beat on and indiscriminately stopped, and they did not feel safe, their own city they were born in, as a safe haven. So many of them went to their grandfathers and grandmothers' homes in the South.
Mm-hmm.
I bet if you look at a map, a time frame map that starts in the 80s, and follow the migration southward. There was even a story about this 2 years ago, I think, and I can't remember the publication, that was just
Mm-hmm.
talking about it and kind of it was like it was a mystery. Why is this happening? I bet that the places where the broken windows policy was going on in these large city centers, that's where the populations were coming from to head south. I bet. I haven't done the research on it, but I bet that's a correlation that'll make some sense and can be proven. If I'm disproven, please somebody out there prove me wrong, and I'll make sure you get the big enchilada in terms of our prizes out there. I love being proved wrong because it gives me an opportunity to learn.
Right. So we do have a couple comments. We just want to shout out to Mimelo, Mameli, Me Molai on Periscope. He said hello.
Hello.
And David Smith said thanks us for doing what we're doing. And and we want to thank you for always supporting us. We appreciate your support. But other than that, keep an eye out on your neighbors. If you want to make a more cohesive neighborhood, start maybe neighborhood watches with each other. Look out for the block, and maybe you will create a better environment for you and your neighbors to live in, and maybe people will see that you care about your neighborhood.
And
It's
that's a
up to
good
you. It's up
and
to the
that's a
people.
and that's a great short-term view. The medium-term and long-term view, get
Mhm.
ADOS activated, get politically activated so you can be a part of those discussions where they decide the types of things they want to do to your neighborhood, despite how disconnected you may be, because it doesn't matter to them. Their ongoing behavior is to
Mhm.
act like it's Sarajevo instead of doing ethnic cleansing. It's gentrification that's doing
Right.
your job.
Right. Okay. We got one question from David. He says, where can he find that information that you spoke of?
Which
Which one?
information?
Which one was it, David?
I talk a lot, so.
Which information? Just type it in the chat. We'll see if we can. He can get you those links to any information that he's speaking of.
I love doing that.
Demiria. Thank you, Demiria. Demiria says, keep it up. We're doing great. Thank you. Thank you for supporting us. Thanks everyone for sharing our little video podcast. Thank you guys. We hoping to grow, so share with your friends, share with your timelines, and maybe they can get some information. Also, we want to hear your voices, our listeners. This is key. This is key because we have a few interviews coming up, but we also want to hear from you. You too can be on our podcast. We want to hear your voices. And you can do that in many ways. One, you can send us an email and tell us what you think, and we can read it. You can go on our website, and on the right side, it says send us a voice message. Click on that and record us a message. And then we'll just snatch it off the internet and put it on the podcast. Another way for us to include your voice is, what was it? There was 3 ways.
I just remember the message ability you gave to our website where people could make a message from there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. David says on whether or not broken window policies led to the move to the South. That part where you were talking about the Great Migration.
Yeah, when I said that, I said openly that I have not researched that particularly. I can only say that there is a correlation between the impacts of the broken windows policy and what was happening to Black people, and a lot of them were leaving as a result. I believe that I'll be glad to research for you the story I read when it talked about Black people leaving, and it alluded to that, but they didn't quote any studies on it, but it's observation. Uh, we knew that Black youth disproportionately, people that could potentially organize, and this will come up in another conversation, that could potentially organize and form groups to stop this stuff. Well, a thing that you stop is you create instability. That talks about us all the time. So who's willing to live in a state of instability where at any moment you could be beat up by a police officer? How is that safe? So it's only logical that people would not want to live in those conditions. And that was one of the things the article I'm talking about referred to as a plausible reason why some Blacks were moving southward. And I'm going a step further. I bet if you look at a map in the 1980s, all the way through the 90s, and at the tail end of the 90s, you start seeing Blacks heading southward. I bet they're coming from those city centers where broken windows policies were at. Did they come from other areas? Most likely too. But I bet a lot of them were coming from those inner city areas where broken windows policies were being enacted.
All right. Okay. Well, great questions, David. He has another one. What would be the best way to research it on your own?
Just
on our own or their own.
Use the title "Blacks Going Southward," and you should come up with several hits right with that. And feel free to communicate with me privately, and I'll be glad to do it with you. We can learn it together.
Right. Yeah, those are great questions because and we've known by watching Yvette and Tone that most of our neighborhoods, because of the lack of wealth, and because of the level of wealth extraction and the wealth grab that always occurs, like it's occurring right now during this COVID crisis, that, and please, ADOS, if you can, hold on to your property that you have. there are going to be vultures that are going to try to take what little that we have during this time period. Please hold on tight to what you do have for not only yourself, but future generation for these kids, because they're going to need whatever you can pass down to them. It's not a lot, I know, but if you are one of those boomers or one of those parents that can set your kids up for the future, please hold on to that. Let's see.
And I just found something for David. I'm gonna post it to him so he can start there.
All right, so David, Daoud's got you all set up to get you. Now he'll listen. Be careful now, because he'll give you 50 articles on that information. No, but he'll get that information to you, and it'll be exactly what you're looking for. I think that is it for episode 5. Like I said, we want to hear your voices. Hit us up. Shoot us an email of any topic that you want to discuss, and we'll put it in our Voices of ADOS. You don't have to be a doctorate. You don't have to be a PhD, whatever. You don't have to be the world leading economist. All you have to do is walk outside your door. If you're ADOS, all you have to do is be honest with yourself. If you're ADOS, and say, something ain't right, I got something to say. Let us know what that is, and we'll put it on the podcast. Also, if we want to encourage those that are in the Columbus metropolitan area and surrounding areas that to please connect with ADOS Columbus, ADOS Columbus. The website is adoscolumbus.org, and get involved locally. Daoud and I would love to work with you. Of course, we're not meeting because of COVID, but we do meet online to discuss and strategize what we're going to do moving forward here locally. I encourage you, if you are in an area that does have an ADOS chapter, please connect with them. Even if you don't see eye to eye with everybody, connect with them. You're not going to agree with everything that everyone says, but you can move forward together for the common cause and goal, and that's reparations and the Black agenda. That's the goal. That's the only carrot that's in front of ADOS right now. Not Trump and what he's doing, not Biden and what he's doing. The carrot in front of ADOS is reparations and a Black agenda. That's the carrot. That's the carrot. That's it. Daoud and I thank you for joining us every Sunday, 8 p.m.-ish. Right, today we were on time. We will meet here to discuss that week's episode. Starting next week, we do want to let you guys know that, let me see, hold on. Can you hear me, see me? I don't know. Starting next week, we're no longer in the pre-recorded news that already happened. We're on current news. So right now, COVID is the top of everybody's list. So most of the news is COVID related. And we look forward to start diving into COVID. And not everybody's going to agree, but we okay with that. We are okay with that. Look forward to episode 6, where we will interview our ADOS leader, chapter leader, Mark Stevenson. We're going to interview him. That's coming up. Well, we interview him. That's coming up. You're going to want to hear that. So that's coming up this week. Current news and a great interview. Okay. So Daoud, say goodbye to the peeps, and we out of here. You there? Daoud.
I'm sorry, I'm listening to you on the other end.
Oh.
Because I was trying to answer David's question.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just saying. So I'm just hearing. Say goodbye to the peeps. Goodbye, David. Thank you for your question. I really appreciate it. And okay, now, I'm sorry.
You're good. You good?
Okay, I'm on. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and hopefully get your friends to be with us here next time. We like talking. You know, I like talking, but I definitely want to hear from you.
All right, thanks, David. Thanks everybody that's going to watch this. Hit us up with a question below, and we'll let the winner of the promo pack know. Who is that? See you guys later. Peace. How do you do this thing? I don't know how to end this. Oh yeah, stop recording. Peace. Okay, we are off live. That was a great show.
And Mr. David Smith, he really likes us. He's one of the first reviews we got, and I sent that to you because he just said we were the best thing since sliced bread. He really did. Yeah. I can't remember specifically what he said, but he was very excited. Well, his was a comment. I'm glad adults are doing this, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
So yeah, he likes what we do, and I really appreciated his question. That was a good question.
Yeah. All right, so this will be up live in on our pages and our group, and we'll talk about let me stop recording here.